Hello all, and welcome today to our webinar looking at the state of customer onboarding and capacity. You'll be joined by three companies today with excellent speakers. Precursive is the resource and automation technology, Taskfeed is the customer onboarding SaaS, and Gainsight is the customer success platform that helps turn your customers into your biggest growth engine. We'll be obviously introducing our speakers in a second, but we'll also be introducing our research. The research comes from both Precursive and Taskfeed, who conducted separate pieces into capacity and customer onboarding, but have brought them together due to the synergies of both pieces that have brought us lessons for customer success across people, collaboration or process, and technology. Now, there should be a little button on your screen that says Q&A. If you have any questions, you can ask them throughout. You can just click the little button and send that across by typing in your question. That comes to myself, and I'll be putting that to the speakers in the Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, do feel free to ask during. But without further ado, let's get on to the introductions of our speakers.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Jonathan Corrie, co-founder and CEO of Precursive. Precursive is a platform which helps companies to improve and automate their resource management and workforce planning. Previously, I worked at an advisory firm called CEB, which was purchased by Gartner, and we had a team of global consultants who helped enterprise tech companies with commercial transformation, and saw the problem firsthand around struggling to mobilize our staff's time effectively, given the global nature of the work and its complexity. And Precursive was born out of that experience. Where today our clients use us to help them mobilize the right skills for upcoming work and improve the performance of the and outcomes of that work, with typically our clients using Salesforce as their platform of choice, and we sit between their sales activities and CRM and the finance system. So excited to be sharing some of the insights from our experience as well as our research on the role of capacity in customer success.
Hi everyone, I'm Andy Mahood. At Taskfeed, we believe that customer success starts with customer onboarding. We've been working to help companies like GoCardless, Vidyard, and even Precursive onboard customers faster. Taskfeed is a product that runs on Salesforce and works with Gainsight, so you can seamlessly guide customers through sales, onboarding, and customer success from a single platform. Earlier this year, I sat down with Adam on his Customer Success Conversations podcast to talk about the customer onboarding benchmark survey that we're going to be covering today. We wanted Adam to join in his new role to help set the scene and understand the context for where customer success is going in 2020.
And hello everyone, I'm Adam Joseph, the Director of Customer Success at Gainsight. So I'm relatively new to Gainsight. I've been here around about 8 weeks, but however, I'm a self-professed customer success nerd. It's been my profession and my passion for roughly about 15 years. So previous to this, I was running my own customer success consultancy business. But you know, I've been one of the thought leaders in customer success here in the UK for some time. I run a website called customersuccessmanager.com, and as Andy referenced, I run my own podcast series as well. So thrilled to be joining this webinar today and hopefully sharing some great insights as well. So I'm sure some of you on today's call might have come across Gainsight previously. So we're a platform, not only do we now run on Salesforce, but also as an independent platform. And we're really there to drive the insights and workflow of customer success managers and enable executives across the business to try and understand the health or otherwise of their customer base and drive actions accordingly. So that's just a brief intro into Gainsight, but let's talk more generally about customer success as a whole. And see, look, there's absolutely no doubt that SaaS or software as a service has had a truly transformative approach to how companies now work with their customers. If you think about the old days of the transaction economy, all of the risk was with the buyer. You know, they had to pay a large upfront fee for sometimes perpetual access to their chosen solution. And aside from, I guess, goodwill, there was no real motivation, financial or otherwise, for that company to keep close to their customers throughout their lifetime with them. However, in today's subscription economy, it's almost completely different. providing proactive resources to help your customers achieve value. But it's not just a nice to have, it's critical to the future viability of your company. Now, that proactive resource and the workflows and processes behind it is what we typically call customer success. Now, customer success is all about loyalty, right? Every company wants loyal customers. And what do loyal customers do? They're going to continually renew and they're going to grow their relationships with you. And not only that, they're going to advocate to others about why they should work with you as well. Now, customer acquisition by comparison is extremely expensive, potentially up to 10 to 25 times the cost of keeping your existing customers. So you can't out-acquire a high churn rate. It makes sense, therefore, to invest in customer success, and especially when you're launching new customers with the aim of helping them see value from your product as quickly as possible. I guess the question is, how should you do it, and what can we learn from some of the world's most innovative and success-led organizations who have already done it? Well, I'm thrilled to say that's what we're going to be talking about today. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Andy.
Thanks, Adam. Actually, it's Jonathan. I'll be kicking off. So at Precursive, we work with a range of companies who operate in industries that are rapidly evolving. The pace of change and the speed at which they must work to meet the demands of their customers is increasing. Throughout the research, we saw a consistent aspiration for companies to be more agile. We were hearing literally the same sentence from executives on we need to be more agile. And our research program was designed to explore the impact of capacity on people and companies in how they would look to achieve this goal. Now, the data showed that for most companies, as we can see here, 95% of them stated that capacity is a key strategic priority. So let's move on and look at some of the themes that came out of the study. Now, we're going to unpack these in more detail later on, but the research highlighted how companies fundamentally are thinking differently about their most valuable asset, which is their people. And they are looking for different approaches that mean that they can create better customer outcomes at scale. And the overall goal of these approaches across what we call workforce science, the new gap, and the wiggle room paradox is to get time back for staff, for employees, and to spend that time and focus on both the employee and the customer. And that's an important element to this. Over to you, Andy.
What we found from our research is that customer onboarding is a relatively unexplored within the category of customer success. A challenge we kept on hearing was, how do we scale? So we heard from over 250 professionals from SaaS and technology product companies who contributed to the research, giving us a picture for how the best are operating to deliver success to their customers at scale. What we found was a maturity gap. The maturity gap wasn't only between the largest and smallest companies, but also between very fast growing companies and similar sized companies. We identified this cohort of customers called hypergrowth, who operated in ways that enabled them to scale. We've identified how we can apply the hypergrowth methods to all of us. And through this analysis, we built a maturity model for customer onboarding to help you identify what you can do to step up your game when it comes to customer onboarding. So by pulling apart and analyzing these central themes, we can now put it back together to form the fullest picture available of how the best companies are onboarding their customers in terms of their people and culture, process, and how they collaborate internally and with their customers and partners. And finally, the technology and business alignment that enables this. So customer onboarding is more than the process and technology. It's about an organizational culture that champions customer success right from the start.
So what we've come to, this is Robbie speaking from Precursive, is a combined view using the two pieces of research from both Precursive and Taskfeed, as there were three key lessons that we realised from those three themes of each piece of research. These come together in very nice, simple packages. A lot of people call it people, process, and technology. We're actually calling it people, collaboration, and technology, and seeing how these three combinations can actually create that agile workforce and help your customer onboarding to customer success story really work for you. And that first lesson will be people.
Thanks, Robbie. So an interesting data point that we saw in PwC's CEO survey was that 77% of CEOs find the availability of skills as the key threat to their business. In the study, the Agile Workforce, we found that companies are moving away from traditional metrics for managing people, such as utilization, which are seen as outdated or in fact a threat to the workforce because they're very one-dimensional. They're often demotivating for staff, or people just game the system to fit the metric. And overall, they're seen as commoditizing people. So measuring people and time in this arbitrary fashion does not necessarily mean that the work that you're doing and the time spent is productive, efficient, or effective. So workforce science, what is it? Well, it's a new way for companies to deploy their skills and their knowledge at scale. And the ways that we've seen companies doing this is firstly by mapping skills, knowledge, and indeed in some cases, staff's passions, the things they love, the things they care about. And then secondly, matching work to that skill or passion. And then finally, for the business to actually analyze the trends of what skills are being deployed to inform forecasting and future planning. Now, very often time is being tracked against work or against specific tasks, but it isn't necessarily being tracked against what skills or knowledge are being used. So that's a different way to think about approaching this.
So a challenge we often hear is this idea that we can't just clone our team, or we can't find people who can do it all. And the solution that became apparent through the research from these hypergrowth businesses was to specialize. So hypergrowth businesses are all growing their customer success functions. CS is seen as a growth lever almost universally by these hypergrowth cohorts. But the path we see play out within these businesses is that CSMs or CS starts as a generalist function, and as you grow, you can afford to specialize, and it allows the CSMs to break out into teams based around stages of the customer journey. So by specializing a team around onboarding, rather than this being an aspect of the CSM's role, it will improve outcomes for the customers at each stage. The key here is to identifying the skills and passions, like Jonathan said, of the team, and applying them in roles that magnify their skills so to deliver greater outcomes for the customer. So this specialization removes this anxiety of being pulled in multiple directions and allows the team to focus on the success of the customer. It's the hypergrowth customers that told us that their customers are buying expertise as a partner, not just software and collaboration of a product and services, is really high level activities like success coaching, not product configuration. And it's this distinction that's the split between customer success and services. Rather than looking to build for these customer success services, hypergrowth companies are more likely to consider it as a value add to their subscription offering, following the understanding that this investment will drive future revenue down the line.
Yeah, and Andy, I think just as a conclusion here on this section, I think it's this really interesting blend of culture and science that are two sides of the same coin. They both play a critical role in making your people successful, and in turn, making your customers successful. Because this is really what that's about, right? It's like fundamentally we want to enable our people to be successful in work and in life, and in turn, in doing so, helping customers to achieve better outcomes.
So for lesson 2, when we were comparing our 2 pieces of research, Taskfeed's clearly labelled their section collaboration here, so all about people working together to talk about the obvious aspect of that title there. But what we realised is when we came together, the Precursive side of the research was all about collaboration as well, and even though we hadn't overtly labelled it as such, we called it the new gap because people are often traditionally aware of the gap between sales and delivery. We feel that gap's actually much wider. So it's becoming problematic for recruiters or where talent enters the business to understand what talent is actually needed. And Jonathan's going to go more into that detail now.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Robbie. So the new gap. Well, companies, fundamentally who are, unable to effectively capacity plan or mobilize people effectively. We saw in the research very often we're complaining about staff burnout. And the people that run those businesses being reliant on short-term reactive solutions rather than being able to be strategic or forward-thinking. And a lot of this is driven by the silos that have grown up over time for organizations. Now, what we saw the best companies doing was thinking about how can we fundamentally create better alignment and reduce the disconnected conversations around pipeline, deadlines, and skills availability, and reframe the way that they're thinking about how time is spent on work or on products. And in doing these things in tandem, and involving those responsible for talent coming into the business at an earlier point in time, they're able to bring in those skills ahead of the curve. So again, if you can think about that alignment in your business and how to achieve that through people, process, and technology, that's a good first step to bridging this gap.
So with onboarding, it's a collaborative process. You need to work closely with your teams internally, like sales, customer success, services, product even. There's probably many more within your organization that you work with day in, day out. And you definitely need to work closely with your customers and often partners as well. It's important to consider the balance between process and collaboration, especially process and collaboration with your customer in mind. So standardization and automation is a foundation of a scalable onboarding function. Repeatable processes defined as playbooks that teams can roll out over and over again are they're absolutely essential to scaling a growing customer onboarding team. This doesn't mean you're automating how you work with your customer, quite the opposite, but you're automating how you work internally to focus on your customer's outcomes and to spend more time with your customer. With that balance, you should also consider how your playbooks guide the standard approach, but let the individual make decisions about what is appropriate in the context for their customer. Not all customers are the same, so it's important to understand and let that individual make the right decision for the situation that they're currently in. Now, we know that early collaboration is critical. It's the very first customer intervention that packed the biggest punch. And this is where customers are really won and lost. And the hypergrowth customers told us in our customer onboarding benchmark report that they're investing more in high touch than low or tech touch onboarding processes. This seems counterintuitive to the narrative we often hear around how technology and automation of these parts of the life cycle are gaining traction. But what we hear from these high growth companies is that it's all about this collaborative experience with their customers, particularly at the outset, to guide these better outcomes from the very beginning of the process.
Yeah, it's super interesting, Andy, because it links to this automate to be human that we can see here on this slide. It is actually a phrase that comes from one of our clients. There's a very large media agency, and the head of one of their business units was talking about part of the reason why we're investing in automation is to get back that time so we can as people be more human and more expressive in the work that we do, with our clients, but also internally. And I think that collaboration is often seen as, or can be seen as sometimes quite fluffy, but it's an organizational strength that you want to build, because it can be an internal strength as well as an external differentiator. And that's going to enable you to, again, deliver better outcomes for customers at scale, which this is all about. So.
Yeah, what I like about this phrase "automate to be human," which I think sums it up perfectly, is the idea that we're not saying that automation isn't the right thing to do. Of course it is. It's what allows you to scale. It's all about having the right assets available as well, having content that you can share with the customer at the right time, whether that's being delivered by a CSM or being delivered through a knowledge base or through in-app prompts, for example. But really, what we like to think about this is how your CSM team or your onboarding team works alongside things like user onboarding journeys or user onboarding prompts within the application. So there is automation there that allows scalability, but it doesn't take but what it's really doing is allowing those individuals to spend more time on higher level activities around success coaching or identifying the outcomes and helping the customer track to those outcomes, rather than sitting down with the customer and helping them configure the product or do some more functional activity that either the customer can do themselves or can be done in a separate conversation.
Great, that's really good, guys. It's really interesting to learn more about changing the verbiage around it towards collaboration and actually making it tangible for the business. It's really interesting. So lesson 3 is technology. Often people think technology can solve everything, and even as technology companies ourselves, we know that's not necessarily true. It's part of the people, process, technology mix that has to come together to make it work. Often the knee-jerk reaction is actually throwing more people at it, and technology can also get ignored. So it's about finding the right balance, and this is what we discuss here.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. So the final key theme that came out of the Agile workforce research was something that we named the wiggle room paradox. So, we're often asking our customers, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, do you wiggle? But what we're talking about is are companies intentionally building in time or planning time for unexpected or otherwise unknown or ad hoc work, right? Or, as we like to call it, when shit happens. Now, we found it was pretty interesting, the split here. We found that just over half of the companies, so 57% of the companies, did plan for the unexpected, but no one across the group actually formalized that approach or that mindset. And yet, 100% of the managers that we spoke to in the survey felt that companies and personal objectives were being negatively impacted by capacity. So that's the paradox, right? Is that there isn't enough time for companies and people arguably to grow in the way that they should, and yet we aren't collectively planning in room for maneuver. So, these companies, though, that did plan for the unexpected, and again, we saw this particularly in tech and in the hypergrowth space, which is not unsurprising, were able to gift time back to their staff for personal development to create more capacity and more organizational capability in the long term. So, that formula that we use internally in Precursive and that we advocate with our clients is to think about, right, leverage workforce science to understand the skills that you have and that you're deploying at scale, close the gap in the silos within your business so that you can identify and bring in those skills ahead of the curve, and then get time back through automation to allow your teams to further develop their skills and their knowledge. And in pulling this all together, you're going to grow that organizational capability and really almost like massage your capacity to deploy output much more effectively and at scale. So that is the paradox.
So when we looked at the technology and business alignment that came out of the research that we delivered this year, we found that companies that were doing this right have identified a business platform. And this is in many cases their CRM. So our research shows that Salesforce is being used by more than 80% of hypergrowth companies and is more or less a de facto standard. Customer success management platforms like Gainsight and customer onboarding tools such as Taskfeed are gaining ground too. Businesses are reporting greater satisfaction with their process when using these tools, and these are more likely to be used by these hypergrowth businesses. So while businesses may be fully aware and awake to the value of onboarding, it's the hypergrowth companies that are following through and investing in the right technology and not begging and borrowing from sales and marketing to cobble a solution together. The right technology enables better organization of work, better understanding of the customers, and allows us to automate work that can be automated. The right technology also provides data and insight that was not previously possible. We found through our research that over half of companies that we spoke to believe that onboarding has a positive impact on measures like first year churn, lifetime value, upsell, cross-sell, but do not have the process or the technology in place to capture these measures. So it's these CS leaders that are missing out on this opportunity to showcase the true impact of onboarding and the positive influence that it's having on all stages of the customer lifecycle, not just those first 90 days, but all the way through in terms of renewal and future revenue down the line.
Cool. I think, we've coined this tech is the bronze bullet. And, we're both, all three of us on this call, we're all software businesses. The technology is often seen as, okay, this can potentially solve all of our problems. But, those investments need to be put in context. You need to have the customer and the employee as central criteria to decision making, not one or the other, and certainly not sacrificing one for the other, but recognize at the same time that yes, technology can be an enabler, but it does need your business processes and in particular your culture to be in alignment. I don't know if you'd expand on that at all, Andy.
Yeah, 100%. So the idea of bringing technology in is it enables that process. It allows you to collect the data and insight that you can throughout that process to understand how you can continually improve. It helps you organize the work and find efficiencies and do things that you couldn't do without it. However, if you put that technology, if you implement that technology without really understanding how your team should be working together, what the culture of that team is, what your process is, and understanding what your process is, then you're going to be automating the wrong thing, or you're going to be doing the wrong thing better or the wrong thing faster, which is clearly something you want to avoid. So before putting that technology solution in place, really understand how can we optimize our process? How can we understand our process? How can we map our process to our customer's journey? How can we organize our teams around our customer's journey? And how do we organize our teams so they can collaborate better between one another? And technology may enable that, but you don't start with technology.
Yeah, that's a scary thought, right? Doing all the wrong things and only faster. Cool. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, let's look at some of the key takeaways for this, Robbie. I mean, from my side, really interesting discussion. So in terms of some of the key takeaways from today, I think people as a differentiator is not a new idea, but in the subscription economy where, for many of us, the vendor is managing and responsible for the risk. It's very easy for customers, if they are unhappy with the way that things are going, to move elsewhere and they will do so very quickly. You need to be able to kind of mobilize and weaponize in a way the skills and knowledge of your people. Adam was talking right at the start about, it's no longer good enough to be generalists. We need to be bringing advice, guidance, and really insight to our customers at every phase of their journey with us. So I think, all of these things should allow us to really, educate our customers, help them to improve the way that they operate as individuals and as businesses. What are your thoughts, Andy?
Yeah, I really echo that. So around the culture and people piece, what I highlight is that you might not be able to clone your best people. You can't just say, we're scaling, we're growing, we need more Jonathans. We need more Jonathans because he's doing a great job. That's not really what you need as you scale. What you need as you scale is to identify opportunities to specialize roles and specialize those roles, and then ingrain that collaboration across these different roles and these functions. That's what will enable you to scale, like Jonathan said, not having an army of generalists, but having teams of specialists. Along with that is identifying what are the customer's expectations from you. And these expectations may be different across different industries, customer segments, maybe different products that you're selling to your customer. But understand, well, what is the customer's expectation from you during onboarding or during your services delivery? And identify how you can organize your teams to meet and exceed that expectation, but then support that through technology and automation to automate those things that are not front of house and are not adding real benefit and real value back to your customer. In terms of tech being the bronze bullet, I think we've said it already, that you need to make sure that you get your people working together, organized in a way that is going to let you scale and get your process understood and mapped to your customer before you start implementing technology. Otherwise, your process is always going to be led by your technology, not by what your customer's expectation is.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. Just before we move on to some questions from the audience or the listeners, just like to remind everyone that both Precursive and Taskfeed have published white papers on the story. So if you want to pick apart some of the data, look at some of the stats and some of the companies that were involved in this, just reach out to myself or Taskfeed, and we'll be able to supply that for you, no problem. I think we've got a first question from Adam himself.
So Adam, I have a question for you. I'd be really interested to understand, how does Gainsight think about the start of the customer success journey where customer onboarding plays arguably a critical role?
So it's a great question, and I think onboarding is clearly a critical part of the lifetime of a customer, right? If you screw up onboarding, then you're behind the eight ball almost throughout the whole of the rest of the relationship. You're almost playing catch up. So, but for me, onboarding doesn't start when the contract is signed. I believe onboarding almost begins from the very first call in the pre-sales. It could be via an SDR who's making a call and trying to set up a meeting for an account executive. Why? Because we're setting expectations from that very first communication. If I think about and look at some of the reasons why, that causes customer dissatisfaction and ultimately churn, wrongly set expectations is key amongst that, where we're maybe overselling and under delivering. So we need to make sure throughout the whole customer journey, even when they're still a prospect, we're absolutely synced up internally, and we've got very much a one team ethos approach. And that doesn't just include post-sales teams like customer success, but pre-sales. Customers don't tend, when they deal with an organization, they don't think in the silo-based approach that we do internally. Internally we have sales teams, and inside those sales teams are micro organizations. Then we move across to post-sales. You might have an implementation team, a group specially responsible for getting customers to value quickly, and then they might get moved to a customer success manager, and then ultimately an account manager who might deal with the commercial ramifications behind a renewal and upsell opportunity. So it's all very siloed. Customers want just a seamless approach. So onboarding for me starts at the very beginning of the journey. And two key things that we need to find out during that pre-sale stage. One is, what is the value that you're looking to achieve from this solution? And you might say, well, that was just one question. But the answer for me is twofold, because one is, what short-term value do we want to get out of, of your first 3 months? So very often when we talk about implementation, we think about how technically we can onboard that customer. So how can we provision them? So for example, send them the IDs and passwords and make sure our back office systems are set up. How can we train them to make sure they can log in? And that's all very important points. But that doesn't necessarily mean when a customer derives value. So what I'm looking at, and some key essential information in the pre-sale stage that I want to collect, is what does short-term value look like and what does long-term value look like? Because subjective, what I call success and what you call success might be two very different things. We need to be really prescriptive about what that is. And then once we understand what it is, the first duty of the implementation manager or the customer success manager should just be to reconfirm with the customer what it is and then come up with a program for how we're going to deliver it. And again, I just want to reiterate, an implementation should be about successfully helping your customer to derive short-term value, not just technically onboarding them.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a lot of takeaways from that. Just a follow-up question. I think then Andy might have a question for you as well. We've talked today a lot about you referenced it right at the start, right? That shift from the transactional economy to a subscription economy. At Precursive, we hear a lot about the skills-based economy. How do you see the role of skills and knowledge changing and the importance of it in the world of customer success?
Yeah, I think we've seen a real evolution in the world of customer success. I think originally the CSM role, the customer success manager role, was very much seen as a jack of all trades, a generalist, if you want, whereby, it wasn't necessarily that important to become an expert in your customers or an expert in the industry that they sit in. I think we're at a different maturity point now. I think customers are quite rightly expecting that, the CSMs that they engage with, to have a higher level of knowledge on many fronts. On obviously the company that they represent, I think that's a given. You have to be a subject matter expert in your product and everything behind it. You have to be a subject matter expert in your customer. So who they are. And when I say the customer, I don't just mean the amount of money that they pay you and when their renewal date is. No, I think it's multifaceted. I think you need to know about the personas, who are your user groups inside that business and how are they all going to be different. I think you need to know about what's going on within their industry. I think you need to, what are the trends that are developing and how is it likely to shape their world in the future? You also need to understand you're probably not the only solution that your customer subscribes to. You're probably part of an ecosystem of third-party solutions that they will regularly access. So what's your position amongst them? Because one of the most important questions I think I ask any one of our organization is, well, how important are we to you? Are we a can do without, which is obviously a huge risk? The can do without get churned almost immediately. A nice to have or essential we can't live without. What we're aiming for is for us all to be essential or can't live without. In order to really understand whether you are essential, you need to provide more than just product training. You need to be a consultant. So, one of the most essential skills that a CSM can have once they've got this knowledge of the customer, their industry, and also our own business is to meld all of that information together and really provide consultative skills to say not only how to use your solution, but most importantly, how it helps them get to what we often refer to as their desired outcome. So that's a very long way of answering, but the short answer is you can't afford to be a generalist anymore. To be a fully functioning CSM, you need to be an expert in all things your own product, all things the customer, and use consultative skills to meld those things together.
So Adam, something we spoke about was how we can enable CSMs to spend more time with their customer. What are the types of activities that you see getting in the way of the CSM spending more time with their customer and their customer outcomes?
Yeah, I think time management is an essential skill for any role, but particularly one in a customer success world. If you struggle with multitasking, potentially customer success might not be the right job move for you. Anyone who's done the role for a while will know one of the biggest battles is just siloed data. So when you come in for the day, what ideally you want is to be able to spend maybe 10-15% of your day figuring out what your priorities should be, but spending 85-90% of your day actioning it. However, what we find is sometimes it's flipped on its head, that you're having to, once you look at your CRM system, your product usage data, support systems, billing, contracts, and so on and so forth, you've easily spent a good few hours just trying to work out what to do. I think one of the reasons why Gainsight exists, or any of the providers in the CS tech space, is that, as I mentioned earlier, we want, the key thing is we want our users to focus in on actions, to focus in on those activities and tasks that we know are going to lead to productivity for our end customers. So bringing together of information and also the insights you can derive for it are key. So a great example might be product usage. You don't want to wait 3 or 4 months before you realize that usage has fallen off a cliff before you react to it. I mean, that's a lot of essential time gone. You want to be able to proactively be able to focus in on that customer and, more importantly, understand why. It could be you've been given a positive NPS score, which is fantastic, which is all well and good. But before we pat ourselves on the back too much, we might want to understand why. What drove that score? Did the customer achieve something they couldn't have done without your solution? Could they be part of an advocate program? I'm a huge believer in advocacy being one of the hallmarks of a winning customer success strategy. If you've got your customers who are willing to stand above the parapet and tell others about how great your service or solution is. So I think data aggregation is absolutely key, and then the insights you derive from that are really important as well. I think that would be the key thing in trying to stay the right side of being actionable as opposed to just being swamped in data.
Great, thanks, Adam. What I really liked about that was about what you said was the focus on how technology and the data can help enable these preemptive actions and enable you to focus on what's important for your customer.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Great. So thanks very much, guys. I think there's some questions that have come in whilst you've been speaking. I'm going to open this to the floor. This is probably one for Jonathan, but Jonathan, we've been asked how many types of skills should we map so it doesn't become overkill. Obviously, there's a lot of skills within your organization, and probably it's more about their availability than volume, but is there a way of mapping this in a sensible way?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's where do you look first is typically what we advise our customers, and this is a little bit dependent on how big you are as a company. Normally you'll see companies tracking things like a person's role or their grade, e.g. their seniority in an organization, perhaps their location. With regards to skills, most organizations are thinking in terms of primary skills rather than primary skills and necessarily anything below that. So again, I think it's just about what you think is going to work for you in terms of what you look for first. So if it's location plus a role or location plus a skill, then think that through. If you're going beyond 5 or 6 things, for some that becomes unwieldy very quickly. So if you start there and build it out so that it's actually used by the organization rather than having a huge kind of elongated skills matrix that sits in the cupboard and never gets used, that would be my guidance.
Brilliant. And Andy, I think we've got one towards you. They've asked, when specializing roles, does this create a poor customer experience with accounts being endlessly handed off?
Yes, that is a really good question. And so this idea of specialization creating additional handoffs between different teams is kind of seen as the key risk with this approach. However, really this is quite easily mitigated with just defining a process for how you hand over things between different parts of the business. So this is already happening between sales and customer success. So why can't it happen within customer success? Sales and customer success is already a specialization. We're really just taking it a bit further. What I would say about handover between teams is that it's important to get it right, and I'm always critical of doing this on a call, or like having a handover call between people, because this is a session where a lot is discussed, but very little is actually retained. So forcing the handover to be asynchronous by default means that knowledge is written down and it's more easily reused as other people need to get up to speed with that account. So by thinking about how you can move the existing handover process you have to be asynchronous, it means that will then be more easily transferable to additional handovers between different teams.
Right, perfect, thank you. And I'm guessing this one's probably more for Jonathan, more probably around the workforce science and the capacity there. So how can leaders better engage with their teams on such sensitive topics as time and passions?
Yes, again, another good question. I think if we as leaders of companies are wanting people to change their behavior and change the way that they spend time, I think we have to take the time ourselves to really understand how they're using their own time, right? How our staff are using their time, and is it being used efficiently, I should say, or not? A lot of the time, we're kind of cracking the whip around, you need to be doing X and Y. And I think, if we can start to get into the mindset of the people and see, okay, where do they feel like things are badly organized? And how can we demonstrate to them that we're making meaningful efforts to solve that? That can be, inefficient admin. It can be things that people just don't like doing. But if we don't understand that they don't like doing it, then again, we're going to come unstuck if we're trying to shift the way that they spend their time and indeed their behaviors. It's quite nice to ask people, at scale, like, what do you enjoy doing? How do you like spending your time? And so I think we've seen a lot of companies beginning a process of mapping out what their teams are interested in and what they're passionate about. And in the simplest of cases, that can mean, for one of our customers, they have a piece of work that comes in with an automotive company and they've got someone in the team that loves cars. So, matching that work to that person means that there's a level of engagement in that individual in the work that perhaps might not be there for someone else. And again, people like talking and spending time around what they're interested in versus things that perhaps aren't as motivating for them. So I think, again, really trying to get into the heads of our frontline team and think about, how are they spending their time? How can we make it easier for them to spend their time in the right ways?
Great, and I think we've probably got time for one more. I don't think we can answer all of them today, but maybe for Andy then. Basically, I'm guessing this is within the people, process, technology mix. This person's saying, how can we improve our process if we don't have budget for people, for headcount?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. So I spend a lot of time talking about hyper-growth businesses, but one of the key points of that was to say, well, how does that apply to the rest of us and to everyone else that hasn't got huge sort of capital financing, for example? So the ways that you can look at improving your process without sort of scaling the team and building specialists in all these different areas is to first of all look at ways that you're actually working already and optimizing your process for time to value. So this may mean doing things in a non-obvious order. So for instance, you can look at what is that moment that really gets the customer to see value in the product, or that earlier initial value in your product, and optimize towards that. If there's a whole sort of raft of activities that you may usually do in the first week of a customer purchasing your product, then have a look at saying, do those things need to happen now? Are those activities getting me towards that first initial value or that aha moment? So looking at how you can do things in a non-obvious order, and also looking at how you can deliver MVP of the solution that drives this initial value earlier in the process, with subsequent services or configuration or add-ons being added later, once that value is initially realized. So with that approach, you'll see much more engagement, and you can use that initial success as an internal success story. So one of the things this might do is it might prolong even the overall time that you're spending fully launching the solution or the product or products to your customer. but what it will do is dramatically decrease the time to that initial value where people start to see success, and within a couple of weeks rather than a couple of months.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, guys. Perhaps as an exciting little teaser, these guys will actually be speaking on Wednesday this week at the Pulse Europe, which is Gainsight's trade show at Kensington Olympia. Similar on this topic, so if you're there, make sure you get along to see that, because they'll be unpicking it a bit more. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to either Amy at Taskfeed or myself, and we can fill those. I believe Amy will be sending out an email with both the white papers for you, and we can also put the session recording on there as well. Just to let you know that there's obviously the products that we serve as well, which we haven't really touched on today, but we'd love to introduce those to you as well, if there's ever an opportunity to do that. But apart from that, thank you very much for your time, Jonathan, Andy, and Adam, and I hope everyone has a great day.